We're here today with Art Davie, the original entrepreneur of MMA. The guy's got it all. With his advertising, marketing background, and starting fight promotion in MMA. We're very lucky to have this interview today. Thank you so much for being here. Really
Adrian,
appreciate
it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here.
First of all, congratulations on your book being optioned as a movie.
Thank you.
That's huge. That's huge. How long ago did that happen for you?
Well, you know, I actually came back to Nevada to write the book. I had been down in Beverly Hills, and when we got approached about the book, and I was very fortunate that Sean Wheelock, at that time the play-by-play guy for Bellator, called me up out of the blue, introduced himself, huge fan, he said, and he kept bugging me. He said, "We got to do this book." I said, "Really?" "Oh," he said, "We got." And I'd been approached about the book. Todd Hester over at Grappling and Gladiator magazine had talking to me for years. Federico Lapenda, who I had a long history with, kept saying, "Let's do a book." But it was Sean who finally convinced me to do the book. And he actually showed up with a publisher, Ascend Books in Kansas City, just a few miles maybe from where he lived. And they were a sports and celebrity book publisher. So we began writing the book. It took 8 months. Got done in April of 2014. The book was published in July and started to sell very well. By the following spring, I had several offers to option the book as a film. We were getting 5-star reviews on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Everybody who read the book, the Jonathan Snowdens of this world, has said, "My God, this is a good story. We didn't know all this." And the book actually, Adrian, chronicles the 4 years that I spent from when I had the original idea as an ad guy, as an ad man, a madman, trying to sell it to my boss's client. And my boss had a client at the time that included Wisdom Imports, and they were importers of Hispanic Mexican beer. Carta Blanca, Tecate, Bohemia.
Huh.
And in fact, our big Halloween promotion for Bohemia was Bohemia. So my boss was always trying to get more of their ad business. And he finally said to me, "I'm going to bring you to the meeting and come up with some wild ideas for these guys." And that's where the UFC idea came up. I presented them with a host of ideas. One of them was the basic seminal idea for the world's best fighter, which is what I was calling it. So eventually it morphed. We eventually, went to the HBOs and the Showtimes and got turned down on ESPN. Finally found a partner in TV. And like I said, when I finally did the book, I was able then to tell the full 4-year story from when I worked at that ad agency to when I finally walked through the doors at the Gracie Academy in Torrance and hooked up with those guys, and then finally got a TV partner in New York to go into a joint venture with us. So the book tells the story of that 4 years and all of the characters that are part of it, because there's a lot of Shakespearean drama in getting this together.
Oh, yeah.
There was
There
a lot of drama in the Gracies.
Oh. Their story amongst themselves.
All by themselves. And I talk about it in the book, Adrian, the fact that, I thought all along it was going to be Rickson. I kept saying all throughout the summer, Royce was not the first fighter that I signed on a contract for the UFC. Pat Smith was in Denver. I had actually gone up to Colorado, found out they had a loophole in the law which allowed bare knuckle fighting. They were doing the Sabaki Challenge, a bare knuckle karate tournament up there. I went up to the Tiger Kim gym on Colfax Avenue, found Pat Smith. He had been working for Karen Turner, the promoter, kickboxing promoter. And he was actually the first fighter I signed. So all summer long, I'm saying to Horian, it's going to be Rickson, right? "Arturo, you must be patient. This is something I understand. I will tell you soon when things are going to happen." Thinking, when are we going to find out? And finally he says to me, "It's going to be Royce." I said, "Royce, your young brother who sweeps up in the academy, who comes over on a Saturday afternoon and asks you for a couple of 20 so he can go to the beach? He doesn't have a car, doesn't have a checking account, doesn't have a credit card? Royce? Doesn't he babysit your kids?" "Yes, Arturo." "Well, why are we putting Royce?" "Because he is young and slim, and people will look at him and say, this is what Bruce Lee would have done. He's not big, and look at with the skill he's able to beat these big guys." "I am right, Arturo." And that's how we went with Royce.
And in hindsight, you really saw that was the better choice than having the giant Rickson just messing everybody up.
Actually, it was, Adrian. That's you bring up a good point there, because at first I was I couldn't get it. I'm thinking, Royce, he's like the baby. Can he win? We're thinking about a tournament. I see. My original idea was the tournament and pay-per-view. A lot of people had approached Torian. They had said to him, "Hey, let's do something. Kickboxer versus one of the Gracies. We'll film it out at Redondo Beach. We'll put it in Blockbuster Video." That wasn't my idea. I saw this as a tournament. single elimination. We'll bring 8. Originally, I had it as a 16-man, and I did UFC 2 that way.
Oh, that was brutal.
It was brutal. In fact, Hoyce said that night, he said it was like dying after 4 bouts. But I figure we bring all these guys together, and we find out who's the king of kings, who's the great white shark. So that was my original idea. So when he said to me, Hoyce, I said, can he do 3 bouts in one night? Arturo, that's no problem. I figured, okay, if you say so. But there we wound up with Hoyce. And, you know, the drama between Hoyce and Rickson and Rorion is interesting because Hoyce looked up to Rickson as a god. He was the best in the family. He was at a level beyond even Holes, who had passed away. He was the innovator in the family. He was the strongest, physically the most dominant. He was a jaguar. He looked like a cross between Mike Tyson and Antonio Banderas. So handsome and strong and muscular. And he walked into a room and people would just, they'd get quiet. He would dominate. He was like a John Wayne. He'd walk into the room, everybody would just look. He was that kind of a presence. Hoyce would walk into the room and you say, who's that skinny kid? You know. So I was concerned about it, but there was a tremendous drama going on also between Rorion and Rickson. Rickson had stolen some students from the academy and was teaching them over the garage. Rorion caught him once, and then he caught him twice. And then that put up a little friction between them. So Rorion, I think, had some issues with his brother about business, feeling that maybe Rickson was maybe pushing the envelope. That was a factor. But in the final analysis, as I look back on it, and that was your question, having Hoyce in turned out to be a fortuitous stroke of genius because he weighed 176 pounds. He looked like the kid, you know, just the kid who comes in off the street.
Yeah.
Magnificent.
Just looked like this least intimidating guy.
Exactly.
And it was an absolute proof of the art, not the person itself.
Exactly. And that's what Rorion wanted to get across. In fact, that was always the difference between Rorion and I. I saw the UFC as an end in itself, but Rorion always looked at it. I talk about it in the book, Is This Legal? He looked at it as a means to an end. He saw that this was a way for him to finally present Gracie Jiu-Jitsu to the world in a way that would, silence all the doubters. Remember, he had never been successful at getting anybody to put up the money to do the Gracie Challenge.
No, nobody ever took him up on that.
And quite frankly, at the time, Rorion didn't have $100,000.
No. So it would have been the academy, the cars, everything.
Exactly.
We would have been calling relatives at that point.
Exactly.
But he had ultimate faith in it.
Yes.
And
I tell the
worked out for
story in the
best.
book, Adrian, that the only way I was able to get Rorion to go along with me, because I was just another guy when you get right down to it, you know, he had had so many people approach him. I actually knew a few of them. Pat Strong in particular, who's an actor and a great martial artist and a devotee of Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do in LA. And he had approached Rorion about doing something called the World Freestyle Fighting Championship. Another idea where they'd do something at the beach, would go to Blockbuster. So Rorion probably felt, oh, it's just another guy. What is he in advertising? I don't know what that is. I actually became the first student at the academy. The day I went over to meet him, he had a whole bunch of blue cards on the table, and he was transferring everybody over from the Rolodex of all of his students over at the garage at his home in Redondo Beach to the new school that he had just leased with leasehold improvements right there in Torrance. So the card's on the desk, and he said, have you ever rolled? I went, what's that? So he said, I'll tell you what, come back tonight. He said, come back with sweats. Can you do that? I said, yeah. I came back, we rolled. For 30 minutes, I was in a state of shock. You know what that's like.
Yeah. All of a sudden you're drowning on dry land.
You're in the water with a shark. You're dying. You're just dying. So afterwards, we sat down in his office, and he said to me, what do you think? I said, I'm blown away, number one. I said, I'm so blown away. I said, I probably should be doing some of this. He said, I'll tell you what. See that card? That's the card number one. He said, you want to sign up tonight? I said, okay. So I actually became student number one.
Student number one.
At the new school, the true story. All the other guys from the Rolodex became 2 through 175 or whatever it was. I actually became student number one. So I began to go into the academy and take these classes. But a year or more goes by, and Rorion and I are just, hey, Arturo, and he's my instructor. An excellent instructor, by the way. Great skills, physical skills, people skills, the highest, right up at the top of the list. But, occasionally I would go and get a juice at the juice bar, and I would go into his office and we'd chat. One night I met John Milius in his office, and I had spotted Milius at one of the backroom events where, some kid had come in from another school, no 100,000 on the line, but he'd come in and said, let me see if I can do this. And Hoyler or Hoyce would have choked him out once, twice, 3 times. Everybody would shake hands afterwards, and they'd leave as friends. One time I'm there, and who's standing next to me is this guy, about 6 feet with a beard, kind of heavy set. It's John Milius. I recognized him from the movies. And I thought to myself, God, that's John Milius. So I began to, try to, hi, John, and, Art, we had class on the same night. I think mine was at 8:30, his was at 9:30. So afterwards, I would stay around and wait, and I would be in Horian's office, and John would come in. And the three of us would sit around and talk about war, soldiers, fighting, martial arts, this one and that one. And that began a relationship between the three of us. I still had no credibility with Horian as far as anything I wanted to do, because he was being told, let's just do a video. He was coming up with some new videos called The Basics of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. I volunteered. I was working for an ad agency that did direct mail. They were experts. They were best on the West Coast. I volunteered to do the campaign for him for free. I said, you just pay for the printing. I'm going to do the whole thing for you. I'm going to do it over Christmas. I said, I'm going to write it. I'll pick all the photos. I'll do the art direction, everything. I'm just going to give you the final art boards. You just go to a printer that I recommend and you pay for the printing. Arturo, I said, trust me, this is what I do for a living. He took my advice, he did it. It brought in $150,000 cash in about a month and a half.
I still remember seeing those videos. Fantastic.
Exactly. And when Hoyce later wins the UFC, I rewrote the direct mail campaign with Hoyce's picture showing his success in the UFC using the techniques of the basics of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. So it was a winner all the way around. But once the money started to come in, I came in his office and said, I'll tell you what, no more freebies. Now let's do some business. He said, what do you mean? I said, you like what we did? He said, yeah, Arturo, this is wonderful. I said, this is the beginning. I said, now let me tell you about the world's best fighter. He sat down there, folded his arms, and just listened to me. When I got done, he said, that's pretty interesting. I said, yeah, pay-per-view and a tournament. Can one of your brothers fight 3 times in one night? He said, no problem. I said, can we get John to help us? He said, John loves jiu-jitsu. He said, he's here every Tuesday like you. He loves it. He said, we'll ask him. So I actually created a temporary poster. I had an artist friend of mine, Mike Stanley, do a temporary poster projecting that we might even do the first one in Brazil on Halloween, 1993, and brought that poster in with John there on a late Tuesday night and showed it to John, and John said to me, Arturo, he said, I love this. He said, whatever you need from me. I said, really? I thought he was going to send me to an agent or an attorney.
Yeah.
He said, you can attach my name to this. I thought, oh my God, this is gold. I'm attaching John Milius' name. Now with the business plan that I had written and the idea to be able to take this forward and having John Milius' name attached as creative director, I wasn't some guy, promoting a martial arts tournament in a high school gym. Now I was a guy that could sit down with the people in New York at Showtime, at HBO. I could say, well, and John Milius is my creative director. They'd say, John Milius, the guy who made Arnold Schwarzenegger a star in Conan? That John Milius, Academy Award nominee? The guy who wrote the scene in Jaws where Quint describes, being on the Indianapolis and all of his friends being eaten by sharks?
That's amazing.
It's John Milius.
That's amazing.
So, and also, by the way, John was the guy that introduced me to good cigars. One night I pulled out a cigar and John said, what's that? I said, oh, it's a Macanudo. He said, from Jamaica? He said, let me tell you what's wrong right here. I said, I'm just listening at that point. What do you mean, John? He said, I used to work with John Huston, the great director, actor, screenwriter, Maltese Falcon, Chinatown. That John Huston. I said, really? I said, John's a famous cigar smoker. He said, let me tell you what John taught me. He said, there are only 2 kinds of cigars. There's Cubans, and then there's rope, because that's what you're smoking. He said, get rid of that rope. So he takes me out to the car, Adrian. In the car, he's got a humidor in the trunk of his Mercedes. He opens up the humidor, and inside there he's got Monte Cristos, he's got Cohibas, he's got Flor de Canio, he's got everything. And he says, he grabs 4 or 5 of them. He says, smoke these. And he says, next time I see you, you tell me what you think. Well,
so you had your homework.
I had my homework, exactly. That's the whole story there. And that's ultimately how, in writing the book, I was able to tell the story of, the John Milius. And of course, the story of Chuck Norris is that's where the title of the book comes from. Chuck Norris gave us that title because when Horian and I went to his house in Tarzana, that's what he told Horian. Is this legal? He just kept saying, is this legal? Horian was reading the points of the deal, this promotion that we wanted to do, the Ultimate Fighting Championship. It does this, it's got this. Well, these are the rules. And Chuck kept stopping him and saying, is this legal? Are you sure this is legal? I guess he felt the Marines were going to come in, National Guard, the sheriff. I'd asked him, I said, we wanted to know if he would come maybe as a commentator or just sit ringside. He vetoed it.
He was just wanted no part of it.
He figured, look, he says, is this legal? He figured you guys are going to get in trouble. Years later, I was at his house. I owned a TV show at that point called Spear. And I was pitching it to him. We had all kinds of people at his house that day, agents, lawyers. And at one point, there was a break in the discussion, and Chuck was standing over by his fireplace. And he raised his hand. He's like he wanted everybody's attention. He said, I want to make an announcement. Everybody got quiet. I was sitting on the couch facing him. He said, I just want to say this, Art Davie. He said, I was wrong about the UFC. I was like, whoa, Chuck Norris just apologized to me?
You got to apologize. Wow.
I thought, how classy.
That is.
And I mentioned it in the book because he didn't have to do that, not to me. He's Chuck Norris.
No, he would have blown over. Everybody would have forgotten about it.
Exactly.
Anybody outside of that room would have never known.
This was 10 or 11 years later. For him to bring that up then showed a lot of, he's a great guy. Also a cigar smoker, by the way.
Well, if anything Chuck Norris was worried about, it's like if Chuck Norris is like, is this legal? Then you know you've got a hot, controversial product on your hands.
I love to tell the story, though, that at one point I went out with Horian to Ed Parker's Long Beach Invitational. And I said to Horian, let's bring a TV, let's bring a monitor, let's get a little booth for whatever the booth cost was. I said, let's run your in-action tape. And he had a nice little in-action tape with intercut with, scenes of lions chasing down wildebeest and, that kind of thing, and showing this predatory aspect. Had some music behind it. In fact, Eric Sherman, whose father's a very famous director in Hollywood, was a student. He's a DP in Hollywood. He had actually directed it. It was a nice little piece. We ran it during the trade show. And I would sit in that booth and I would just sit there. As soon as I hit the button to play that video, the aisle would crowd up and people would stand out here and point and look with their mouths open. And they would say to their friend, you got to look at this. Hey, come here. You got to look at this. And I said to myself, this is $1 million right here. This is $1 million idea. And that's why I kept saying to Horian, we got to do something big. He said, oh, yeah, video. We do it at the beach. We put it in Blockbuster. No.
You knew it was much bigger than that.
Much bigger than that.
And it's very interesting you chose to do it there, because that's where Bruce Lee had his big coming out.
You're dead right about that, Adrian.
Same place.
Yes.
That's a place where you have to go make history, apparently.
Exactly. Yes.
If you want to redefine something.
Exactly. Good point.
Wow. Very, very interesting. And Bruce Lee would have been a huge, huge fan of the UFC.
I think so. Interestingly enough, when we talked about the first UFC, Semaphore and I, our TV partner, we talked about giving maybe some sort of an honorary award. I had voted for Bruce Lee. And I had some contact with Linda Lee Cadwell, his widow, and we talked about that, and we looked at some of the issues because Universal owned all the rights to the Bruce Lee imago and icon and so forth, and all the intellectual property. And eventually we decided to give it to Elio Gracie, which turned out to be an interesting thing.
Yeah.
And many Brazilians have said to me, Art, what you don't understand because you're not Brazilian is that night, the mantle of leadership for the Gracie family passed from Elio to Horian. Elio looked at what Horian was a part of, seeing that now what he had done in Brazil with Vale Tudo was going to somehow be presented now to a larger world through the West. And that night, he said, that was when the issue of whether or not Hickson or Horian would be the titular head of the family was resolved. That night, in a sense, Elio took the sword and put it on Horian's shoulder and was knighting him. Interesting.
Because he saw such a dramatic change, and this is what the world is finally going to see. We
Absolutely.
can prove it in Brazil all day long, but unless somebody drives by here and sees it.
Interestingly enough, I once asked Horian, I says, what does the old man think about me when it comes to jiu-jitsu? Because I rolled with the old man once, and that was scary. He was 78 or 79 at that time, and he killed me. Oh. He just played with me, and he showed me that too. And he said to Horian, he says, let me tell you about Arturo Davie. He said, the only thing Arturo knows about jiu-jitsu is how to make money with it. I once had that printed up with a picture of the old man and myself and gave it to Horian so he could hang it at the academy.
He was a real character.
He was.
He was.
Very special.
And what an amazing opportunity for you to be able to train with him. I was fortunate enough to be able to do the same.
You
so
did.
We're in that club together.
Ah.
We got to train directly from the man. He's a sneaky old man.
Very.
Well, you've talked about John Milius a little, and now we understand how that relationship started to form. What was it that really created such a good mentorship? Because that whole thing really allowed you to have some rapport. And during the first part for free, that was very, very smooth. And not a lot of people know when the right time to work for free and when the right time isn't.
Good point.
Especially amongst Cutmen. They're not sure when you're coming up through amateurs, volunteer your services, but you don't know when the right time to make those trades
Make that transition, right.
Yeah. What was it about John Milius that you thought that was the guy, other than his great experience, of course?
Well, you know, I quite frankly, and I like to talk about mentors and mentorship because a lot of young people have said to me, you know, how do I get a mentor? What value is a mentor? What can you tell me about the process? And I like to tell some stories, and one of them is about Milius, because Milius, in all fairness, was so connected to Jiu-Jitsu that in a sense I was secondary to that. I did not have to develop a primary relationship. He was so fascinated himself. He was brought there by Reb Brown, Captain America. Reb, as an actor, who in fact was in a number of movies with For John, and was in a movie with Gene Hackman and the great kickboxer Randall Tex Cobb. So Reb was a tough guy, and he was the guy who turned John on to Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. So John was already deeply connected to Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. My connection to John was, John had asthma, and he had wanted to go into the Army or the Marines during Vietnam, and his asthma had prevented that. I enlisted in '66 in the Marine Corps. So John knew that I was a guy that had volunteered, and then in '69, I was there in Vietnam and came back a sergeant. So I think that was a connection. John was fascinated by that entire universe, which he himself had never directly entered. Also, the world of cigars was one that was a constant connection for us, because John then was my mentor. He was the guy who would tell me, this, you don't want that, you want this. And I would say, John, I'll smoke it, I'll let you know. And it was like I was doing homework, and it was delicious homework, by the way. So John was great that way. And I also, when you look at mentors, you have to say to yourself, what is in it for them? And if the mentor is retired, if that man or woman is retired, there's a greater chance that you have to recruit them as a mentor, because now, as a retiree, they can kind of sit back and enjoy the adulation and the respect that they get from younger people. If they're still involved in business and very active, you're going to find it hard to have access to their time because they're so busy. Unless you can bring them business, and occasionally that's ultimately the best way, and that's not easy for most people. The guy that starts public companies, how do I bring him? What business can I bring him? I had a mentor in San Diego named Myron Eichen. Myron was a venture capitalist who had started companies like IVAC, IMED, Proxima. I think IVAC was the company that had the digital thermometer. They replaced all the old thermometers with a little strip that you could touch to the tongue. Took it public. He had put up some money for the agency that I worked for, and I had come up with a specific ad plan that was kind of unique. He financed it. Well, the success of that allowed he and I to get closer, but he was much closer to my boss, who he really thought was a great creative guy. I was more of a salesman. So my connection to him, I was always looking to strengthen it. I found out he was interested in flotation tanks. He had never done it, but talked about it, read about it. Our office was out at the beach in San Diego, and there was one literally a couple hundred yards from the office. I got 2 tickets for it and called him up and said, hey, I got some opportunity for both of us to do the flotation. He said, really? Afterwards, we went out and had dinner. It became something we did twice a month together. So I had gotten interested in him, found out what he was interested in, and was able to do something that brought us closer together. He later hired a friend of mine who made a lot of money working for that company, got stock options. Myron was very busy at the time, so it was always difficult to get his attention. If a mentor is retired, it's easier because then they can sit back and enjoy the respect and adulation that they get from a young protege. But you have to, ultimately, you always have to figure out what's in it for the other guy. Well, what is this person interested in? And today with the internet, if you can't find out, let's say you're looking for a sponsor, you're a young fighter, and you're in Dallas, Texas, and you find that there's a funeral home that might potentially has done some things in the sports arena. Might want to find out that the owner was honored as the guy who was the best funeral director of the year or the decade in Dallas. And when you finally meet with him, you can talk about the fact that he's the kind of guy that pays a lot of attention to detail, and that's why he's the best in town. And you do the same thing as a fighter. Here's how I focus on detail. You're looking to make connections with people, and you're showing respect for what this individual has done. You always have to work backwards from the other person, not from yourself. The hardest thing I've had to communicate to fighters is that you're not the most important person in this world. The fan is. And they look at me and go, no, my trainer, no. The fan. And they go, what do you mean the fan? You're in the sports entertainment business. No, I'm a fighter. No. That's a means to that end. The end in itself is you're in the entertainment business, and you are an entertainer. You are a product. And they look at me and say, no, Coca-Cola's a product. I ain't a product, man. I'm a fighter. I said, no. You're a fighter, and your job is to entertain people. So you have to say to yourself all the time, the average person can only hold 7 things in their head at one time. In product categories like soft drinks, you can name maybe 7 different soft drinks. In a very small product category like, let's say, luxury wristwatches, people are lucky if they can mention Rolex and maybe Omega. You know, a small product category, you can't even think of what.
Yeah.
So in the fight business, think about all the fighters that are on that ladder. Maybe the ladder might only be 7 or 10 or 12 names long. Where are you on that ladder? Well, I'm not an international guy yet, true, but where are you at in Dallas, in your local market? If I go to talk to people in Dallas, do they say you're the best middleweight in Dallas? Are you the best amateur light heavyweight in Wichita? What have you done to market yourself as a product? Gee, I never thought of it that way. Well, that's your first job. The problem doesn't even exist in the product. You have to look in the mind of the customer who's going to buy it. You have to work backwards from the mind of the person you're trying to appeal to. What do fans want to see? I'll give you one of the best examples of a young fighter in terms of being able to reach out to a mentor and eventually see himself as a product. About a year or so ago, I met a young heavyweight named Jason Preston out of Tyler, Texas. Met him at an amateur event here in Las Vegas. Big, impressive guy, but he really had an impact on me because he had done a little homework on me. He had actually went out and got my book and read it. So when he stepped up to talk to me, I'm thinking to myself, this kid he's a cut above. He's smart enough to know that if he wants something from me, he needs to somehow engage me. Well, since that time, he's gone way beyond anything I could have ever, and whatever advice I've given him is nothing compared to what he's done himself. He's a king on media, on social media. He's got his own webpage, and he's got his own video. He's got a video that makes him look like he's the latest toothpaste brand, and it's cool. Jason the Preston Predator. He has vehicle wrapped his SUV with 4-color graphics that says Jason the Preston Predator. I gave him one idea that he's now starting to use. He was close to a 1% motorcycle gang in Tyler, Texas, where he's from. I said, well, when you say you're close to them, he said, yeah, but they're always coming to my things. They're kind of like a sponsor. I said, talk to them about bringing some motorcycles to the event and riding you into the arena on a motorcycle.
Oh, that's amazing.
I said, everyone in the arena will remember you. They'll have no problem remembering the Predator. Jason automatically, though, gravitates to that. He has accepted the fact that he's a product, he's in the sports entertainment business, and he's got to work backwards from the other person's perspective. It's a sponsor. What's important to the sponsor? Who's that sponsor trying to reach? I need to know something about that sponsor's company, about their products, about their marketing. If I'm going to sit down and talk to them, I have to impress them that I've taken the time to understand their business. They're not interested in my business. They want me to be interested in their business. Everybody's always asking the question, what's in it for me? So your job is to figure out what's in it for him and be the guy that can help deliver it. You do that, doors will open. You don't do that, you're going to be sitting on the curb broke.
That's the big difference. So first of all, they need to make the transition where they see themselves as a product for the fan to consume.
Yes.
That's the biggest change that most fighters aren't recognizing these days. You think that's the biggest thing holding them back?
I think your own experience, as a Cutman as well, you know that that's one of the big problems that fighters have is that they see themselves as focused on, I need to grapple better, I need to get my takedowns, I need to do more jiu-jitsu, I need to get my Muay Thai leg kick really working. All of that's important, but that's only the means to the end. You're in the entertainment business, and ultimately, your manager, your girlfriend, your mother, your best friend, your workout partner, they're important, but they're not important as the fan. And when I tell that to some young fighters, I can see that sometimes their eyes glaze over. It goes in one ear and out the other. They ain't getting it. The bright ones, though, I think start to listen. They go, yeah, I guess when you think about it, if Coca-Cola didn't have a lot of fans, Pepsi would be number one. Exactly. Yes. It's not rocket science, folks. You have to relate to where the products are on the ladder. In soft drinks, Coke's on the number one. They're on the highest rung. Right down below that is Pepsi. Way down the bottom is, there's Mountain Dew, there's Joe Cola, there's RC, whatever. Somewhere on there is 7-Up. But you have to look at where you're at on the ladder, and you have to see yourself as a product on that ladder. If you're in Wichita, you got to say, who in Wichita knows me as a fighter? Well, that's not important. As long as the other guys know, the other fighters know, the other middleweights know. That's all I care about. Really. When you go out to the arena, how many of those people are going to buy tickets for you unless they know who you are and they care about you? Will a promoter want to work with you if you can't put people in seats for him? What business do you think you're in? I'm in the fighting business. Really? When did you decide that? Well, as soon as I got in the gym and I took my first shot, I realized this is where all my energy has to be. Fine, go out and get a book. Repositioning, one of the great books on advertising. Go online. The information is available today. Start to get the information necessary for you to see yourself as a product and for you to start to focus on the fan. You can do that. Maybe you'll become Connor. Maybe you'll become Ronda. Maybe you'll become John Bones Jones.
And do you think you need some people you mentioned always have a little bit of edge, a little bit of controversy, like Muhammad Ali, and you've linked Ronda Rousey and Muhammad Ali a lot, made that comparison, which I think is very, very fair.
Yes.
They've both rattled cages in their days, and Ronda's days aren't over yet, I don't think.
Exactly.
Muhammad Ali, had an incredible legacy, but it was more appreciated after his career was over. So do you think that that's necessary to? A lot of people seem to respond to that kind of branding now, where it's a more harsh tone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you have to recognize that since there were three important athletes in the 60s that changed the game. There was Joe Namath. Before Joe Namath, everybody was like Johnny Unitas, quiet, respectful, short hair. They all said the same things. We're going to give it our best chance on Sunday. We respect the other guys. And Joe Namath came along, boastful, wearing a fur coat, his hair long, had a mustache. He was his own man. That changed football forever. Billie Jean King changed women in sports and women's tennis forever. Suddenly, she was willing to challenge Bobby Riggs in an intergender match. She broke the mold. She set the standard for women athletes, which eventually produced a Ronda Rousey. She was the trailblazer. And the other watershed athlete that changed everything was Muhammad Ali, former Cassius Clay. Until he came along, every heavyweight boxer sounded like Joe Louis. They talk respectfully about their opponent. I hope to do my best. I've been training good. Always the same speech. Muhammad Ali came along and said, I'm my own man. I can be as proud as I want to be. I can be as boastful as I want to be. I'm my own man. And he said, I'm in the entertainment business. At one point, he gave credit to Little Richard and Gorgeous George as inspirations for his act. He was smart. Today's MMA athlete has to do the same thing. Why? More than ever, people, we live in an over-communicated universe. That's what I used to teach when I was in the advertising business. There's so many messages coming at us every day about so many products and services that most of us just shut down. That's why in a product category, we're lucky if we can remember 7 names or 2. So when you get right down to it, a fighter's job is to somehow put himself on that product ladder and distinguish himself from the other fighters. How does he do that? How about letting his personality come out? How about letting what he is be? I said to Jason, I said, you're from Texas? Maybe you should be wearing Tony Lama boots and a cowboy hat. I like the idea of these 1% motorcycle guys bringing you in.
Fantastic.
That's a great idea. I said, because all you need to do is to figure a way so that when people remember you, they go, oh my God, that's that guy. Remember what he did? Remember what he did? Remember how he looks? Remember what he said in that interview? Your job is to distinguish yourself. I maintain that the first gay athlete in MMA, as transgender Fallon Fox showed, the first gay athlete, if he comes out and is proud about it and feels that he can say, this is what, he will be as famous as Muhammad Ali at some point because he will have blazed a trail that, in a sense, has not been blazed in the fighting sports. Other than one kickboxer over in Thailand about 5 or 7 years ago, most fighters who might have that personal orientation have never done that. Whoever does that in MMA will become, provided he can fight.
Yeah.
Fighter's a damn good fighter. By the way, if you can punch like Tyson and you can grapple like Hickson, maybe you don't need any of this. Fail. You still need it, folks. You still need to look at yourself as you're in the entertainment business. So you're right about that. Young fighters today need to pay attention to that. If I could preach one thing to them, it's that. You'll use it to attract a mentor. You'll use it to attract sponsors. You'll use it to attract fans. And ultimately, you'll use it to make deposits at the bank. And I think that'll be very controversial. By the same token, if you have somebody who, when Muhammad Ali came along, my good friend Ernest Hart from St. Louis, great kickboxer, he says, my father's generation, a guy like Ali, they were worried that the Ku Klux Klan would have hung him up, would have strung him up. For him to speak out against the war, for him to diss Sonny Liston, he said African Americans were not allowed to do that. It was considered enormous. If you're not that old and did not live through that as I did, that was considered so radical at the time that it alienated, you either loved him or hated him at the time. Later, he became a beloved figure after he retired, where he's universally admired by everyone. But at the time, you either loved or hated Muhammad Ali. So I think that if a gay athlete came along in MMA, who's very good at what he does, I think if he came along and was a responsible and a viable exponent for that way of life, that his fame would be enormous. First of all, it would position him uniquely, quite frankly. That's what we're talking about here, positioning. What I'm in effect saying to athletes is, you're going to do what you have to do in terms of your fight skills. The sport has matured. You're going to train, you're going to grapple, you're going to punch, you're going to kick, you're going to lift weights, you're going to run. You're going to do all that. If you're looking at yourself from a marketing standpoint, you have to say to yourself, what do I need to do? What do I need to learn? What do I lack? If I don't have those skills, who can I attract that could help me with them? Is there a professor over at a local college, a marketing guy who would be thrilled to be at my next fight with free tickets because he's going to put his arm around me and give me some ideas? Hey, Joe, Jeff, you ought to be doing this. Here's what you ought to say and see and do. So I think it's very important today to recognize that a guy like Larry Holmes, as a heavyweight champion, suffered from the fact that he somehow did not distinguish himself in a way that Ali did or later Tyson did. And he was always complaining in the latter part of his career that people forgot about him. He was a very good fighter when you look at his record, but he somehow lacked that quality of personality. So if a fighter turns to me and says, you know, Art, I just ain't a big personality kid, I'd say, well, I might even make that work for you. Figure out you can be the silent cow. You can be the guy who doesn't say much, the man of mystery. It worked for Greta Garbo years ago. Maybe it'll work for you. But you have to find ways to distinguish yourself. That's the hardest message for young fighters to understand. That plus the thing that you brought up earlier, seeing that they're in their sports entertainment business.
That is, I think, the biggest divider. And since we're talking about different categories coming in, women's MMA, all the pioneers of women's MMA, we have Gina Carano and Ronda Rousey and everyone, and now we're starting to see people in all the other jobs. Swayze Valentine's, UFC's first Cutwoman, and we have Camus Albuquerque, the referee. Kim Winslow. Yeah, we have all these people coming in. What advice would you give to them? Because in some of those positions, they're not trying to market themselves in the same way. They're not allowed to wear sponsors during things like that. What advice would you have for them to move them forward in their field?
I think they've got the same obligation, especially with social media, to advance their brand. I think if you're a Kim Winslow, you have to say to yourself, am I the John McCarthy can I be in that same league? Why not? But you have to first conceptualize yourself that way. You have to see yourself as a viable player at that level. I think we're open today to that. But it requires effort on the part of the individual to take advantage of that and to say, well, what do I need to do? How do I get my name out there? Do I need a blog? Do I need to be posting articles about women in sports, about women in my sport? Do I need to become the exponent for some of the changes and some of the controversies that are coming along? I need to make myself more visible. So I think today, whether you're an analyst, whether you're a cut man, whether you're a manager, whether you're a promoter, whether you're a fighter, the MMA world has a real job in terms of getting itself more into the mainstream. Now, we've come a long way, and I point out that back in the day we couldn't have women athletes. We were under tremendous pressure even for what we were doing.
Already, yeah.
If I had announced that we were going to do females back at the time, they would have really come with torches to burn down the burn down the building. So I think that today the opportunity for women has grown enormously. And I think that we can look forward to seeing more women be successful in the sport.
Absolutely. I think that's fantastic advice. They just need to be active and still making their presence known, social media, and discussing the topics that are out there.
Absolutely. And I think today you have to realize that this is becoming a big sport. I think the Reebok deal is on everyone's mind. And I think you have to look at the perspective that all of the major league sports have uniforms that are sponsored by a particular company. Football has Nike. The NBA has Adidas. The NHL hockey has Reebok. Major League Baseball has Majestic. So I think that the Fertitta brothers, Zuffa, who owns the UFC today, was looking long-term and seeing that, in all fairness, we need to have a Fortune 500 company involved with us this way. And I think that they see it as also the avenue which will open up sponsorship with other Fortune 500 companies in time as well. When you look today at Major League Baseball, go to any website that'll give you all of the sponsors in MLB. You're going to look at 25 or 30 names, and they're all Fortune 500 companies that are putting money behind that sport. Now, I'm old enough to remember back in, let's say, 1968, the average baseball player in Major League Baseball made about $20,000 to $25,000 a year. Well, contrast that with what they make today. And the difference is a lot more sponsorship today compared to 1968. I think Zuffa is looking at the year 2030. And I think that when you look down the road, the 6-year deal with Reebok will grow or change or be replaced, and others will be involved. And they're looking at the sport long term. Now, the short term implication of that has been profound. In fact, you look at someone like Uriah Faber, who has an apparel company, Torch, and he's obviously taken a hit in his pocketbook in terms of what's happened with this deal. Am I right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think that short term, I think that there's some concern that this has had some implication for the bottom line for fighters. And I think that's normal. It's part of the growing pains for the sport. And I think that the Fertittas knew that when they looked at this. The only major change that I'd like to see is that right now, the way the sponsorship is divided is based on performance and star power. Now, in Major League Baseball, it's based on years in MLB, years in the sport. So when Alex Rodriguez, who's an enormous star in baseball, isn't getting a sponsorship cut based upon his popularity, he's getting it based upon the fact that he spent X number of years in the sport. If that formula eventually is applied, I think in MMA, I think you'll see less complaining and less grumbling about that situation. That's what's being done in Major League Baseball by comparison.
Just the years in.
Years in. So the decision to make it based on performance and star power, rewards the Ronda Rouseys and Conor McGregors and John Joneses of this world. And where does it leave the guy who's, a lot further down the list and who's struggling to make a full career out of this? The UFC employs 400 to 500 fighters under contract. So short term, it's had implications and impact on the bottom line of a number of guys who are not at that star level. I think long term, I think that the move in this direction is going to be one that eventually puts more money on the bottom line for more fighters over a longer period of time. Because it's been that formula in hockey, basketball, baseball, and football.
So you see that as a natural progression, and these are growing pains of...
Part of it's growing pains. And yet, if I were a fighter today or a Cutman looking to get sponsorship, it'd be a concern. On the other hand, you could see the UFC looking at it as well. Now we've removed the possibility that that a fighter will be wearing shorts that say, dependable condoms,
yeah.
or Joe's bail bonds. And yet, if you're a fighter in Wichita, you need Joe's bail bonds.
Absolutely.
And your job is to go out and interest Joe in sponsoring you. So again, you need to understand something about what Joe's business is and how you can connect to him and how you can show him what will be good for his business. By the way, today, one of the first jobs that anybody has in terms of sponsorship, and you're not part of the Reebok deal, for instance, is you have to talk about cost per thousand. There's an old advertising term, CPM. You have to talk in terms of what you can do for the sponsor. If you come into a sponsor and he has no idea how many people will be able to be reached because he would be sponsoring you, your job is to make a very viable case. You better learn some presentation skills. Wouldn't hurt to understand how, Microsoft Word works and how, any of the presentation programs.
Oh, absolutely. Like the keynote and things like
keynotes.
that.
I mean, all of this stuff today is, in fighters, well, I don't need to do that. It's not my job. My job is to get in the gym and hit that bag. And my job is to get on that mat and roll. I need to be able to work from the guard. Fine, yes, you need to do that.
You need to know those things.
But you need to know those things too. You need to have somebody around you that knows those. There's only two things, by the way, that really kill a fighter's career. You think about it. It's either bad management, or it's a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a mother or a father that just kills the fighter. They squash him in some respects. In my personal experience, it's been one or the other as a promoter and as a booker and matchmaker. The other thing I think that a lot of fighters forget is that the world really doesn't have any grown-ups in it. There's no grown-ups in the world. Everybody's either a 6 or a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
And if you can understand that, you got a better chance of hooking up with him because now you're a 6, 7-year-old, and now you're going to understand this guy needs this. He needs this. I have to somehow figure a way to help this guy get this. And that's a way for you to work in tandem with them. And, fighters, the other thing that I think victimizes fighters, Adrian, is that it's an individual sport. So they see themselves as a lone wolf fighting the world. It's not a team sport. But they tend to forget that life is a team sport. Human beings are pack or herd animals. We rely on relationships, alliances, marriages, partnerships, corporations. We rely on these things to allow us to make life happen for us. So your job as a fighter, even though you're in there in the ring by yourself or the cage by yourself, but your job as a fighter is to figure out what do I need around me that will facilitate my career, that'll move my career forward as opposed to hold me back. I remember certain fighters that I've had that when I walked in the dressing room, I thought, if I had a gun right now with me, I'd probably shoot his girlfriend. You know, there's a good chance that I'm not going to get the performance I was hoping for tonight out of him because she's really got him messed up. It's just part of the business.
Wow, that is really fascinating. Look at the social atmosphere of fighters and the choices they make. Mike Tyson, I think, would be the most famous one of interpersonal relationships.
That's the best.
Cutting in there, and then some others with also, well, he double dipped. He also had management issues.
Yes, both.
So
And
both ends coming there.
There's the classic example. That's the best example that you could have given, is that Mike had both problems, and therefore his career went totally off the tracks, despite the fact that as talent, he had God-given talent that just is very rarely bestowed on one human being. It was extraordinary. But and he had a style, which, of course, you know, being a swarmer, and with his height and reach, perfect. But he had management and relationship problems. And if anything, took him off the track. And by comparison, you look at Evander Holyfield, 4-time heavyweight world champion. Here's a guy who I always thought, and to this day, is still doing well because he had his life in control, and he knew how to do what he needed to do to keep moving forward. So there's two examples right there, A and B. And if an MMA fighter would study those two careers, they would learn all they need to know. They don't need to listen to Art Davie at all, believe me.
So those are the definitive case studies.
I think so. Sugar Ray Leonard is another great example of a guy who, you know, in the ring and out of the ring knows how to do what he needs to do. He's a man's man, a smart guy. You know, those are the guys that we need to be emulating. We need to be looking up to those people and realizing that, as they did, Sugar Ray Leonard knew he was in show business. Remember his commercials for 7-Up?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, he understood. And Madison Avenue understood him. Part of your job as a fighter is to figure out, you know, how do I present myself in a way to appeal to, A, my natural constituency, which may limit you. It may make you a bad guy, a butt Then when that's done, you've done all of what I told you to do. Now take it to an attorney, and for an hour or two of his time, just let him look at it and bless it. That's what I did with the fighters contract at the UFC.
So you just crafted it yourself and then took a look at it, say, hey, is this
kosher?
Is this all good?
Is this good? Is there anything in here that fish hooks me that I need to know? Well, you know what you said here, and you ought to make this California, whatever. But I'm telling fighters today that contracts don't have to be mysterious. Remember, though, that some contracts can last forever. A good example is marriage is a contract. In the state of California, in a number of states, 50% of your earnings, 50% of your net worth, 50% of your real property will go to your wife if you get divorced. So remember that these things can go on for a long time. Do not enter into contracts lightly. Enter into them by being first very clear about what you want to need and very clear about what the other guy wants and needs. Then you can write out the basic bullet point terms. You can probably get half of it done online with the legal boilerplate that's available. Put that together, bring that into an attorney and say, give me an hour or two of your time. I need you to review this. That's the cheap way to do it.
That is a fantastic way to do it. One thing I've learned through that whole process is, going with a gut feeling. A contract is only as good as the two people signing it, which I've learned that once or twice the hard way. And how would you get that gut feeling? Like, what prompts you when you walk into a business meeting and you're like, okay, all the terms look good, everything's on paper, I've written out what I want, but I'm just not sure this guy's going to deliver. Have you ever made a change based upon that?
Absolutely. And I tell you something, today in the age of the internet, if you don't do your homework on who you're doing business with, then you're just not really trying and you're not paying the right price. You need to go out and have a real good handle on, let's say you're dealing with a guy and he's a lawyer. You can today, there are websites that you can find out if he's ever been sued, what his rating is. There's Avo. You can go out and find out that in Jacksonville, Florida, this guy's been sued 4 times by clients who have said that he cheated them. I mean, it's all available today, but you need to do that. If you walk in there without doing your homework, and later on you find out that you made a mistake because you were just trying to try to rely on your intuition and your instincts, and you didn't see enough. Today, find out who he's done business with. Has he ever filed bankruptcy, a corporate bankruptcy, individual? Who's he screwed? What do other people say about him? There's probably ratings out there on this guy somewhere.
Because of the information age, just gather for any scenario. You're going to go into business with somebody, you're looking for a sponsor, you're signing some kind of contract. Research who you're going to be dealing with first of all.
Absolutely.
And then try to draft up an initial contract, have a lawyer look it over, and really evaluate yourself. But how do you evaluate and monetize yourself? How do you evaluate where you stand in your given market?
I think one of the big problems that fighters have is that they don't look at themselves realistically and where they're at in the market. It's like Hickson Gracie that time saying he wanted $1 million, and Horian had gotten Hoist to agree to step down after UFC 3, and Hickson would have stepped in his place. So I think what Hickson did was he priced himself out of the marketplace. And I think that's an ongoing problem for fighters. So when you ask the question, well, how does a fighter, in putting together an agreement, a contract, how does he price himself in the right way? The biggest problem is being able to look at yourself objectively in the market that you're in and knowing what you represent in that market. Gee, you've had 6 fights, all of them amateur. What do you think you're worth? I mean, come on, be realistic about what your real value is. What is everybody else paying for fighters? Can you find out what XYZ promotion paid fighters? Well, gee, he's paying more. We'll go over and talk to that promoter at some point. But you have to be realistic. As I mentioned, the first thing you need to do in crafting any kind of a negotiation or agreement, a contract, is you have to be real clear on what you want and need. Most people walk through the door not having a real good idea of what they want and need, or they confuse the two, and they think their wants are everything. And if they don't get their wants, it's not a deal. And that screws them. That's what happened to Hickson that time. Hickson didn't have a clear picture. He's reading in the newspaper that Mike Tyson had $10 million. But we're not boxing yet, Hickson. No. Talk to me in 20 years.
It's
or 30
infancy.
years. It's infancy.
It's not the time.
Yeah. So the big problem that fighters have is that they don't see the big picture. My advantage always was that I came from the business world. I was an ad guy, madman by trade, and that enabled me to look at people and customers and clients differently. In order for me to walk into a client's office and get his business, I had to know everything about him and his product. Think about it. If you're going to give me your advertising business, I got to know why your product is better than his product. What's your unfair market advantage, your UMA? What's your USP, your unique selling proposition? Why is your USP better than his USP? Are you guys selling through distributors? Do any of your distributors like you? Why is he have bigger distributors than you do? Why is this retail chain have his product and you don't? I needed to know everything about them. I tell fighters, you need some version of that yourself. Oh, really? Well, I'm not an A guy. No, but you're marketing you. So your job is to go out there and everyone you deal with. Gee, I need to work with a Cutman. I need to work with this guy. I need to do that. Find out about this trainer. Who's he trained? Does anybody talk bad about him? Does anybody say he does this or that? Do some homework. If you don't do homework, later on you have nobody to blame but yourself. And I find that a lot of people operate in life hip shooting. They just come out and they say, well, I'll try to do this. I feel good about that. I like this guy. I think this guy's a schmo. You can't do it, you can't operate completely on gut instinct. Gut instinct's important, and if your gut does tell you something, you might have to listen to that. Only you know, based upon your own experience, whether or not your gut instincts have been able to keep you away from trouble or enable you to find right opportunities at times. But not doing homework, I see it, you know, we tell the story in the book that Bill Wallace had written an article right after the UFC, critical of MMA back in '94, January of '94. I had recruited him as a commentator for the first UFC because I saw that he was having an ongoing argument with Kathy Long, the Queen of Mean, great kickboxer, and she was saying women should be in kick fighting, and Bill said no. He thought it was a waste of time. Excuse me. And I figured that they would both have a certain energy and a certain on camera. Bill didn't come in prepared, and then Jim Brown decided he didn't want to do the play-by-play. He wanted to do color. So I said to Bill, you need to really get up on all the fighters, names, records, everything. And when you look at that first UFC and you see he even got the name of the show wrong, he called it the Ultimate Fighting Challenge. You know, not doing your homework, even if you're a pro and you don't do your homework, you're going to pay. You're going to get hurt. So I tell fighters, your job not only is to prepare for your opponent, to prepare for the fan, to prepare for your opponent, to prepare for the fan, to prepare for the next fight. You have to be looking at the big picture all the time. I did it in advertising. You have to do it because you're now a product. That's my major gospel to young guys, is that you need to see yourself in that way. And I think it's real hard because, you know, it's still a young sport, and a lot of guys just still say, you know, I'm just a fighter, Art. I know how to bang. Well, I hope you can hit like Tyson and grapple like Hickson, because you're going to need a lot of luck.
Even then, you're going to need these other tools. These other tools are going to distinguish you in your career.
I think so.
Whether you remember it or not.
Yep, absolutely.
Even if you don't end up becoming a multimillionaire, that is what builds legacies.
Exactly.
So, this is fantastic advice. Are there 3 key pieces of advice you would give? Do your homework.
Do your homework. Remember, there are no grown-ups in life. There are only kids. And just doing your homework and being prepared is an enormous tool. People have also asked me too, you know, what's my definition of professionalism? They say, well, you know, a professional is somebody who works for money. That's pretty easy to define. Anybody who's a pro works for money, whether he's a dentist or a fighter. What's professionalism? Professionalism is to understand what the standards are that create greatness in anything, whether you're a dentist or a fighter. If you understand the standards that create the highest level of performance in an area, and you then decide to follow the path necessary to create those standards for yourself, then you are expressing what I call professionalism. That's the difference between professionalism and a pro. Because anybody who says, well, I just fought for money, I just got $1,000 for a fight, well, you're a pro. Are you really do you have professionalism in what you're doing? What are the highest things that you can do? What did Evander Holyfield do? What did Sugar Ray Leonard do? You know, what paths did they follow which created the standards that they have set? Those standards define what is the penultimate in professionalism. If you figure out what that path is and you follow it, then you are becoming a professional in everything that you do. That's the difference.
So you find someone to emulate. You see how they reach their course, and you try to emulate as much. Don't reinvent the wheel.
Right.
And
adapt it for yourself.
Adapt it.
Absolutely. But you have to figure out what is the path to the highest levels in my area, in my field, in whatever I endeavor to do. Whether it's a business, whether it's a hobby even. If you want to become the greatest bass fisherman in America, amateur, you better figure out what would be the standards necessary to separate you from the rest of the bass fishermen. How do the best guys operate? What have they followed? What have they done? Gee, they ran up stadium steps carrying a log to be a bass fisherman. Is that true? Well, then you better be doing that too. You know, and once you figure out what that path is, you've then defined what it takes to manifest professionalism, whether it's work habits, personal habits, career habits, avoiding drugs, getting education. When you ask about the 3 things that are important, getting an education, doing your homework, and remembering that the world is full of children and no adults. Those are my 3.
I love those.
People have asked me now also about the film. They say, you've got this film under in development. What does that mean? We hooked up with the Legacy Entertainment Partners, and they brought on a real super professional that I've learned a lot from. His name is Robert Latham Brown, and he's been one of the greatest production managers and producers in film history. The list of films, Indiana Jones, The Thing, it just goes on and on. At one time, Mel Brooks, the comedian actor, called him Mr. On Budget, gave him that as a nickname because he's famous for bringing in a film on budget. And the way that you separate the films that are really successful from the films that aren't is that some manage to stay within budget, as opposed to going way over budget and not selling enough tickets. And I think Spielberg also calls him that, Mr. On Budget. So having Robert Latham Brown attached to the project is real exciting. He teaches at USC Film School. He's now my mentor in the film business. I pick his brains. I've tried to learn from him. And we've gotten together and I say, Bob, how does this work? Why do you? And he was the one who, in the film Ali, said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to hire fighters who can act rather than trying to teach actors to box. He said that film has to really be effective showing Ali in the ring. We got to make sure that Will Smith can carry it. And Will's a great athletic actor to start with. But they decided to cast fighters. And he said the same thing about, is this legal? He said, we're probably going to cast a lot of MMA fighters as actors rather than the other way around. So I said, really, does that work? He said, absolutely. He said, you got a guy with a charisma. You get a Jason Preston and you want to put him in. He's already got a certain amount of panache and style and charisma. And he can read lines. He can memorize the lines. We put him in there.
Just show the guy where to stand and what he's supposed to be feeling at that moment.
Right. John McCarthy or Randy Couture will probably be the fight coordinator for the film. So, it's not going to be rocket science what happens in that cage. So I've learned a lot from Robert Latham Brown. She then went and we went on a great search for writers. At one point, Alvaro Rodriguez, Robert Rodriguez's brother, El Mariachi, Machete, his brother, who's now the lead writer for the From Dusk Till Dawn, the TV show, was looking, he wanted to write the script. But we finally selected young Tanner Bean and Katie Mathewson, a young team that is being mentored by one of the biggest names in Hollywood as a writer. And they've been working now since November 4th. On the script. They're due to deliver it February 22nd. They already have it up to 180 pages. They're now bringing it down to 120. And we're real excited about the fact that after that, we'll then go out to find the right director. And with the right director, we'll wind up with the right stars attached to this. So we're real excited about the movie. I always tell people, though, it took 10 years to make Forrest Gump. So you never can tell how long it'll take sometimes to craft a movie and get it out to the screens. But we're hoping it'll go in front of the cameras next year and maybe be in the theaters by Christmas of 2017. We'll see.
I would love to see that. And I'm sure in the movie, as you did in the book, you give so much credit to the fighters who you built the company on.
I dedicated the book to the 10 fighters. I tell the story in the book that, when I made a lot of calls and sent a lot of faxes, there were no internet in those days, I sent a lot of faxes around the world looking for fighters. Most people turned me down. Most people said, is this a movie? Is this a movie? You need a movie actor? No, I need a fighter. With no rules? You can't do that. That's just in the movies. No, this is a real deal. In fact, the fun story was that by Wednesday of that week in Denver, Ken Shamrock, who'd flown in on Tuesday from Japan in a prank race show, said to me, Art, is this a real shoot or is this a work? I said, Ken, we've been all through this. I said, we talked about this on the phone 2 or 3 times. He said, well, there's a guy here in karate pajamas. He said, he's never had a pro fight. He was talking about Hoyce. So, I was turned down by a lot of guys. I went to the Kronk gym in Detroit, Emmanuel Stewart's gym. I went to Joe Frazier's gym in Philadelphia. And all those guys laughed at me. They said, you want to get a heavyweight boxer to fight these karate boys? Are you crazy? You crazy boy? I said, no, I'm serious. They said, that ain't never going to happen. You're chasing pipe dreams. So early on, I found that it was real hard to get fighters. It got easier after the first show. So I dedicated the book to the 10 guys who were brave enough, the 8 fighters in the main tournament and the 2 alternates, who were brave enough to put their careers on the line and show the world what they could do against people who, were ready to put it on the line as well. So yeah, the book and a movie would be dedicated to the fighters in this business. There is no sport without them.
No, absolutely not.
And we're hoping that we'll be able to attract the right director and certainly the right stars. We've got, you know, a great story to tell, the story of the Gracies within it. The story of my relationship with Bob Meyerowitz at Semaphore. We did not sign the contract for that deal until the night of the show.
Oh.
And I found out an hour and a half before, earlier that day, I found out from Campbell McLaren that unless I signed that contract, they couldn't put it on pay-per-view. So Bob and I were still negotiating with his attorney on the phone and my attorney on the phone in California. 90 minutes before the show, we were still arguing about, I said, well, you got to put up the purse starting in show 2. We're not putting up the purse anymore. Wow, we ain't putting up no more money. I said, you're in that part of the business. Well, I'll provide the fighters, I'll do the booking, I'll do the matchmaking, you pay for the fighters. And we were still arguing an hour and a half before the show. I had to hang tough. Finally, Bob caved in, and I signed, and the show went on. It was that kind of drama.
So that kind of negotiating last minute, everybody else is warming up and you're figuring out the future of the show, trying to get it on air in 90 minutes.
Exactly. In fact, I tell the story in the book that I'm still getting dressed, trying to put my tuxedo on, and John Milius' son, Ethan, who's now a district attorney prosecuting cases in Los Angeles and very famous doing it, he was my PA, my production assistant, and he was putting the studs on my shirt, and he was pouring me a scotch. And I said, where's my cigar? So and here I am on the phone for an hour with the 2 attorneys, Bob Meyerowitz, and Campbell McLaren, all of us on a massive conference call, fighting at the last minute. I also tell the story that Thursday night, the whole thing almost came apart in the fighters' meeting. It almost ended up in a brawl. And if it wasn't for Taylor Tooley, now known as Taylor Wiley, who stood up and said, I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I'll see you all tomorrow night if you want to party in the arena. He signed the release, slammed it down on the table, and everybody started to applaud. And that's how that meeting ended. He saved my butt. But it almost ended up in a brawl. It almost got a little crazy.
Wow. It was quite the rodeo for you to just give your first proof of concept.
Yes.
And what kept that faith in you the entire time that this was something that needed to be out? Other than you knew how exciting Jiu-Jitsu was, and you knew you had some good partners, and John Milius' lending himself to you was really giving yourself some credibility.
All of that was a value, but the key was a decision and an understanding that I reached that I was bringing back pankration from the ancient Greek Olympics, which in 4 Olympic Games had become the most popular event on the program. Bringing back the glories of the ancient world, the ancient gladiatorial world. I knew when we went to the Long Beach Invitational, Ed Parker's Long Beach Invitational, and we showed a videotape that the Gracies were using called the In Action, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in Action, and I saw the response of fans in that trade show, and they would just fill up the aisles looking at this video, and they would elbow their friends and say, you gotta see this, you can't believe it, you gotta look at this. I said to myself, this is $1 million idea. Once I had that idea firmly locked in my mind, I was like a bulldog, I was like a pit bull. Nothing was gonna stop me. I was going to, and all along the way, in fact, I tell the story in the book that at the last minute, my T-shirt guy let me down at the first show. I had all these T-shirts being built, and you know, there were things falling apart always, but I never lost sight of the fact that this was an unbelievable idea, and I was in the right place at the right time. It's like in the movie when George C. Scott as Patton says, I'm in the right place in history at the right time. I'm right in front of the Tsar with the Third Army, and I can go right into Germany. There's nothing stopping me. There'll be nothing like this for another 1,000 years. That's exactly what I felt. I knew that at where I was and what I was doing, this was going to work. I say it in the prologue of the book. I knew that night, after the first fight, when the audience's reaction, I said, this is going to be monstrous. Young men all over the world are going to want this show. They're going to want to watch it. They're going to want to do it. And that's what's happened, hasn't it?
That's absolutely what's happened, and we can't thank you enough for it.
Just
faith, everything you put into this, it's absolutely amazing.
You give a lot of credit to luck. You know, you can have the best ideas in the world if you're not in the right place at the right time. It doesn't do you any good. So I give a lot of credit to luck too.
Absolutely. Any law of attraction work there for you? You think if you're putting good things out there that you'll be able to help manifest things a little
I think
bit?
if you operate on that basis, it's a good way, because perhaps there is some law of attraction, there is some morphogenic fields that allow you to communicate that kind of energy and attract it to yourself. I don't know. Maybe the physicists and the Tyson DeGrasse, the physicist on TV, can tell us whether or not that's true. But I do know that it's probably a good idea to operate that way, because it'll keep you focused, it'll keep you moving forward. And half the battle in life is to remember to keep punching. If you get knocked down, you got to get up, you got to keep going. You're not going to win, you're not even going to finish unless you take that step and keep going. So with the UFC, I knew that we would attract plenty of the right people. We also attracted problems, but that's part of life. So if you have a good confidence about what you're doing and a belief that you're on the right path, then you'll eventually end up with a ring like this.
Wow, that's awesome. That is awesome.
You'll eventually become in the Hall of Fame. So I've been very fortunate, and as I've said in the book, and John McCarthy, who did the introduction of my book, said, he said, I've got a life now that I couldn't have only imagined. I used to be a police officer in LA, and now I go all over the world, and people know me, and I'm having a great time. And I feel the same way. It's been a great ride. I've met a lot of great people. The people in the fighting business are fantastic.
Wow.
It's been exciting, and it's been a thrill. I got a good ride out of it, and you can't ask for any more in life than that. Most people don't even get that.
No, most people don't.
Nope.
Most people don't get to see all the wonderful things that are out there and
Exactly.
blaze their own trail.
Exactly.
Do you believe that entrepreneurial spirit is mandatory for everybody in this field?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, if you don't see yourself as an entrepreneur, you're in the wrong business. And again, a fighter being in an individual sport should have a propensity to look at it that way. But as I say, it ultimately is a team sport too, because you're going to require alliances and partnerships and relationships that you need to move it forward. But to be an entrepreneur is really key here, because unless you figure a way to put the food on your table, there isn't going to be an awful lot of people waiting around to do it for you. You have to be entrepreneurial enough to drive it. And in fact, I've been a serial entrepreneur. Out of the last 45 years, I've been self-employed 36 of those years. So I've had businesses started that didn't make it, and I've had some that went on for a dozen years or more. And my biggest home run, I guess you could say, was the Ultimate Fighting Championship.
Oh, absolutely. Projects so far we've seen. Do you see any of those that you described as failures as just an opportunity to learn? A lot of other very successful people say failures
Yes.
very useful to them.
Absolutely. It's like being a baseball player. You need to strike out in order to hit home runs. You need to swing at the ball. So, the thing you have to learn how to do is to overcome any feelings of rejection or personal, oh my God, there's something wrong with me. I lost a business years ago, had to file a corporate bankruptcy. I was dealing with a banker who eventually went to jail. I had to testify at his trial, but it collapsed a car dealership that I owned in San Diego. I talk about that in the book. And, I remember sitting on the beach for about 4 or 5 weeks, getting myself together. And doing that was the key. Once I got together and said, wait a minute, I could do this again. So what? I lost it all. No big deal. I'm going to go back and I'm going to do it again. And you have to be able to do that. Everybody does. If you lose a child, if you have a serious illness, if you lose money, in a venture, you have to be willing to pull yourself together and keep going forward. Everybody does. We know down deep that that's the case, and yet so many of us don't do it because we let our own insecurities and inadequacies pull us down. But ultimately, that's our main obligation, is to keep fighting through to the next step, to the next opportunity, to the next thing that you have to. You got no other choice.
So just like the fighters, you have to pick yourself back up.
Absolutely.
No matter what area you're in, you've got to pick yourself back up, find out whatever started you on that path in the first place.
I just dedicated a book today to a fan, and I wrote in it, "Never say die." That was my dedication. Never say die. Keep punching and get up off the deck. That's all you need to do. You do that, everything else is cream cheese.
That is amazing. Is there anything else we didn't cover that you'd like to discuss?
I think we've covered it. I'm real excited, like I say, about the film. For me, it's I produced TV commercials, and I've been involved in television before, so it's not as if I have no experience. But the film business, the movie business, is special and unique. Remember that most movies don't make a lot of money. Most films fail. So it's an interesting high-risk business, and this is one that I'm looking forward now at this point in my life. I'm not a kid anymore, but I'm still passionate, still energetic, still connected. And learning from people like Robert Latham Brown, I still feel very vital. And for me, the opportunity to see what we can do with this film is an exciting one, because I think, A, we've got a great story. It's gotten 5-star reviews from everybody.
Oh, absolutely. Amazon just loves it.
Amazon loves it, as you know. And I think that it's going to be a heck of a film. The two writers, Tanner Bean and Katie Mathewson, have really been excited. In fact, I just was looking before I came here at a text they sent me. They said it's better than we ever thought it could be. They said we are so excited. It's going to be such a film. So I think we're going to blow some people away. We're also going to do a good job of marketing it, which was not done with Warrior, a film that two friends of mine, Gavin and Greg O'Connor, produced and really didn't get a lot of spin on.
It was a fantastic movie.
It was a good movie. By the way, I was supposed to be in that movie playing myself.
Oh, you were?
And when a previous movie starring, I'm trying to think of the name of the movie, with Colin Farrell that Gavin had produced, had flopped at the box office, they cut the budget for Warrior, and they cut me out of it. I was in about 15 or 18 pages out of a 110-page script, playing myself starting a new tournament called Sparta with a $5 million first prize. And I gave Gavin some input on if a fighter had been a Marine, have some Marine issues and some Marine minutia that he needed to know. But they didn't do a great job of marketing that movie among the MMA crowd. We did a great job of marketing Is This Legal to the MMA crowd with Jay Tan's help in Los Angeles. Jay, who's involved with the
U of MMA?
U of MMA,
Yeah.
with his partner there, Turi. And Jay did a great job for us getting the word out to MMA fans. So we're looking to really market the film very aggressively to the MMA community. And my fellow producer, Jenna Vasquez at Legacy Entertainment Partners, is very excited about the fact that the MMA phenomenon is a worldwide situation. I've got fans on Facebook in Afghanistan, in Norway, in Thailand. They're all over. So when you talk about an MMA movie, we can do some great marketing in Japan. How about the market now in China with ONE FC over there?
Yeah,
fact, Sean
China,
is
Singapore, everywhere in there. That's doing so good and just blossoming.
My good friend and who was my editor on the book, Sean Wheelock, was a great help to me on the book. He was the one who convinced me to just focus on the first show. Just do it about show one. He said that's the most important UFC in history. You have to tell that story. Everything else came after it, but that's the one you have to tell. He's now doing some commentary for ONE MMA in Asia.
Oh yeah, the ONE FC.
Yeah.
They're doing a fantastic
Victor
job.
Cooey, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they're doing wonderful work there. So,
Well,
this is fantastic, and I'm sure that it's going to be a smash hit.
Hope so.
With the global audience for MMA and how passionate and educated the fans are, they're going to want to see where it came from.
You remember what I said to you earlier, though, about the fact that a fighter's got the job to look always at the big picture?
Yeah.
I have the same job here. If I just look at the MMA audience and say this movie has to appeal to them, I'm actually missing the boat. We've got to make this a good movie that somebody who's not even interested in MMA say, it's like Moneyball. I enjoyed that movie, somebody would say. I didn't know anything about it. It was about baseball, but I love the role of Brad Pitt. I didn't know about that whole situation with the statistics and the computer. This movie has to appeal above and beyond the MMA audience to a larger audience. And by the way, the story of Kathy Kidd, who was my event coordinator and eventually became my wife, Katie Mathewson has understood that there's a love story there, and she has brought that into the element that's in the book. Kathy's really the B character in this movie, because she was my Yoda. When I would just yell and run in circles, it would be Kathy who would say, "Wait a minute, let me talk to you," and she would say, "Moby, I want to talk to you." And Kathy was my great settling influence. So her story's in the book, and it'll be even more so in the movie. So
that's amazing.
My job is to make sure, along with Robert Latham Brown and Jenna Vasquez, that this movie appeals not only to the MMA audience, as I like to tell fighters, everybody, someone's grandma would be, I saw this movie the other night on Netflix. This is a good movie. That's what it has to be. It's a good story. It's a good drama.
Well, thank you so much for your time. All the future professionals, people entering into the game now, and the guys who are in the game but could be doing better are just going to extract so much valuable information from this. I really appreciate how open you've been with us and just sharing all this incredible information, really speaking from the heart, and that's what we love to hear. We love to hear people who can really show everything they've got and leave it all on the table. And
well, Adrian, I want to thank you for your time, your professionalism, and I'd like to say to everybody out there that this industry is only going to get bigger. It's going to get more mature, and there's a place for it for all of us, and there's a place for it for a lot of young people today that are just getting into it, that will really see the fruits that will be on the tree in 5 or 10 years. Years ago, John Millius said, eventually 50 million people on a given evening are going to be watching some champion crowned in this sport, and that's where we're going. As big as a Super Bowl.
I can't wait for it. And we're looking forward to your film, and you definitely have our support.
Thank you, Adrian.
All right, take care.